My name is Peter Cornwell, and I'm a film director. Well, I started out at ABC TV doing sound stuff. I started in the sound transfer suite, then I moved up to becoming a sound recordist out on the news. And in my spare time, I started doing stop motion animation, which led to doing. I started this really ambitious short film called Ward 13, and I ended up taking a redundancy package from ABC and finished Ward 13. And then did the festival circuit, won all kinds of awards, and that's what got me over here in America. Because it was just so well received over here, I actually, through this great guy, Luke Dunn Gilmuda, who's extremely talented Australian sound designer, and he offered to get involved in Ward 13. And while I was finishing the film, he got a job working with this guy, Ren Kleiss, who's now 5 times Academy Award nominee. He did Fight Club and Girl in the Dragon Tattoo and stuff. And so Luke was working with him, and I said, "Oh no," thinking, "Oh no, he's gone to America." But he goes, "No, no, I can finish the sound over here." And so we exchanged mixes, via the internet, and he showed it to Ren, and Ren said, "Well, this is awesome. Why don't we mix it over here?" So I flew over to San Francisco, and we mixed the film over there, along with this other guy, Malcolm Fife, who is one of the music editors on Lord of the Rings. And so it was pretty awesome. My very first short film had this amazing sound design happening, and then when it was finished, he said, "Well, we better hear what it sounds like in a real cinema." So they played it at the Stag Cinema at Skywalker Ranch, and it got invited to screen at Pixar and Digital Domain and all these different places. And but even then, that didn't really all the festivals that won like 16 awards around the world um, didn't really get me any notice. It was Ren said to me on one of my last day in second last, what was it, third last day in America. He rang me up and he said, "Look, have you looked up all the people I recommended?" He gave me a list of people in Los Angeles I could talk to, should look up, and one of them was this guy Kirk Thatcher, and I knew he'd worked at Henson's, and he'd been involved in like Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff, and so I looked him up, and he saw the film and said, even though I was running late and he had to go, he said, "Oh, you should meet my manager." So my very last day in America, I caught my cab. I had all my bags in the cab. I went to meet my manager, this guy Peter McHugh, at a place called the Gotham Group that reps a lot of animators uh, and now more live action film directors or people making the transition from animation to live action. And he saw the film and he went, "Wow, that's the best short film I've ever seen. I'd love to rep you." And so then I got in the cab and I was on my way to the plane, and suddenly I had representation. And then he rang me up and said, "You can do live action, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I mean, I'd been on plenty of live action sets when I was a sound recordist, and so I felt comfortable with the idea. My references for Ward 13 were much more live action references than animation ones, and people seem to see it as like a live action film. So when I came back, I had like 54 meetings set up with different producers around town. So I, you know, met with all these producers, and it led to there were a couple of false starts on different movies, and then it led to Haunting in Connecticut happening. What I really want to do is action stuff. Was kind of my real sweet spot. Like if you look at Ward 13, it's a 13.5 minute film, and it's got like 7 minutes of action. But it's hard to get action on a lower budget. You need a certain number of setups and stuff to make it work. And so I thought I also like horror films, and the idea of a film where you use the camera a lot to tell the story. And there's whole scenes, there's sequences which don't really have much dialogue, and so it gives you a chance to really, tell a visual story, which is what I really like to do. So I was looking around, and this script came in, and I just could really see the possibilities. I thought it had really great kind of iconic moments in it, and it had some really good character stuff, and interesting original scares and original concepts, and yeah, it was a different spin on the haunted house story. Well, I was going to do another film with Warner Brothers, and it fell apart as these things can do. And Paul Brooks at Gold Circle Films, who did like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and they did White Noise and a bunch of other things. Since then, they've done like Pitch Perfect, and he was looking at doing the film. So they actually flew me to New York, and I met with him there at a restaurant one night, and we had like uh, expensive champagne and stuff. And I was showing him all the storyboards for the film, the other film, and he was really impressed. So when they got the script for Haunting in Connecticut to a point where they'd been developing it for like 2 years with this guy, Adam Simon. Tim Metcalf was one of the writers who wrote Revenge of the Nerds, and the other guy's Adam Simon, who is now doing that show Salem. He's like the showrunner on that, and I just thought it was a really good script, and they sent it, and so I went into the meeting. So I was already sort of half, we already kind of had a relationship. They already liked me, so that helped, I guess. But then we teamed up with those guys, and we still had to sell to get distribution in America and stuff. They wanted to get Lionsgate on board, so I had to go in with them to pitch my take on the movie to Lionsgate and get them excited. So we just like storyboarded out some sequences and had some artwork and whatnot that we presented to Lionsgate. So so they don't just have to imagine in their head; they can get an idea for what the film will be like. Well, we watched a lot of haunted house films for starters, and just different horror films that we liked for different looks and different ideas. And the DP Adam Sweeker, he was a Canadian guy. Basically, it's a trade-off when you're shooting in Canada. You really want to get all the tax incentives that you can. Like when they first told me Haunting in Connecticut, I went, "Oh, we're shooting in Connecticut, right?" Because I knew Connecticut had some tax incentives, and you'd think that would make sense. But they said, "Are you kidding? No, we're shooting in Winnipeg," and which gives like 40 cents back in the dollar. But that means you have to use as many local people as you can. And even in Canada, Winnipeg is a pretty small town. So my DP came from Toronto, and the focus puller came from out of town, and a bunch of them like that. And so they have to pay their hotel bills and stuff, but still the tax incentives make that worthwhile. And you have to hire some local cast and things too, like the little kid that's on the poster. He was just a local kid, but he turned out to be fantastic. But you're kind of, it's a trade-off with different people. But what was great with Adam is, he was Canadian, but he just had a fantastic reel, and I really only had like a couple of conversations with him on the phone before going up there, so it was a little bit scary. But he just turned out to be a fantastic guy, and we really saw that we're on the same page. When I was a sound recordist at ABC in Australia, I worked with a lot of different cameramen over the years, so I think I've got a good feel for what they're like, and which ones are the real deal and which ones, maybe aren't quite as savvy, and it was a really it was a really good experience. And we just basically sat down and talked a lot about the films and the style, the camera style, and which kind of films we wanted to do. So when we were actually on set, we had a pretty good shorthand. But I got to say that's really important. Having a lot of discussions beforehand and a lot of preparation, so that you don't have to talk as much on set. Because when you're on set, you want to spend as little time talking as possible. You want to be setting up the camera, for the next shot, not talking about setting it up. They couldn't afford to build a whole house. Like in The Conjuring, for example, that was like $20 million, and they built the whole house. And every time you're inside the house looking out, that's green screen. In our case, we had a real house, which is kind of tricky because I'd storyboarded out a lot of the scenes for how I thought they should go. And of course, that all changes when you find a real house. The chances of finding a house that matched my ideal design were close to zero. But we did find this amazing house that had a really interesting staircase, which is one of my um, goals, because I feel that the shot when you walk into a haunted house, you want to be able to have that shot where you're sort of looking down on the people, where they look kind of powerless, and you're looking up and it looks kind of ominous, and which is a fairly standard thing in haunted house films. But I think we did it a little different. And these people were actually about to move in, and they were repainting. So normally you have to like move if you're going to use a real house, you have to move the family out and pay for their hotel bills. But these guys weren't in the house anyway, so they really just delayed moving in by 5 weeks or something. And so we got to repaint it and everything and mess around with it um, in a way that you often don't get to do. Well, one thing I did was I took quite a few acting classes, and because coming from a background in animation, I really wanted to feel, comfortable in that world of actors and be able to talk their language. And from actually doing some acting yourself, you really get a feel for what you want out of a director. And uh, yeah, I find you talk about the character a lot before you start, and find reference points and find points of communication that you can, so you both know you're talking about the same thing. And then on the set, hopefully, uh, you're on the same page, so you don't need to give them too much direction. But I mean, sometimes the best direction is just to say, "Can you go again?" Sometimes I think beginning directors think because the performance wasn't exactly what they wanted, they've got to tell the actor something in their head. Sometimes the best direction is just say, "Do it again," and they already know what they did wrong. They were just warming up. Like when I did Hemlock Grove, the guys, the two leads were like that. You just get them to go again, and they'll suddenly do a much better take, and without saying anything a bunch of times. But I think what you don't want to do is just give them a line reading and say it like this. You want to. I try and like ask them questions, and there's a bunch of different things in your toolbox. I had pretty strong ideas about what I wanted, and I had storyboarded the whole film pretty much. So uh, certainly all the scare scenes, all the set pieces, and so I knew what I wanted, but I was interested in seeing what the editor would come up, just looking at see what he came up with anyway, because he'd always come back to what my version was. I was interested in seeing what he'd come up with originally. My first editor was actually this guy Eric Beeson, who edited A Simple Plan and uh, a bunch of Sam Raimi's films, and he was really good. At one point, he left because our post production process actually went on quite long on Haunting in Connecticut, not because it was in trouble, but because it actually was doing so well. We actually had a a screening, and it went really well, and so they just, but it was getting an R rating, so we wanted to keep working on it to get the same score with a PG-13 rating. So uh, he'd already booked another gig, so he left, and we got a new editor, Tom Elkins, who ended up going and directing the sequel actually, and he also edited like Annabelle recently. And he was fantastic. But what was actually really good is that he got to come in and see the film. He hadn't seen all the dailies. He hadn't assembled the whole film. He came in with a completely fresh set of eyes. So he had a bunch of ideas that really helped, the process. And it was really good bouncing around with someone that was not familiar with the shoot or anything. And yeah, so it was a really fun process, and it really brought home to me that quite often the producers, they try and save money by skimping on post production, and it just seems that a lot of times I think that's a huge mistake because it's so cheap. Post production is really cheap. We had our editing room there that with the Gold Circle owned, so really they're only paying, all they're paying was um, they weren't paying me. I don't get paid for the edit. You get paid a flat fee for the movie, so they're paying the editor and his assistant, and that's about it. And I mean, the effects house who are picking up doing some effects, and but you have to do that anyway. And so yeah, for a little, you can edit for quite a long time, and it doesn't even come to the cost of like one day of principal photography. You know what I mean? When you're employing dozens of people. And so, yeah, in this particular case, it just kept getting better and better. And Paul Brooks was really smart in that he didn't want to stop editing until he felt the film had but if we were still improving it in the edit, he was willing to keep letting us edit. So it went on for quite a long period. And what it meant was, we could all feel really happy that we'd done the most with what we had. If you don't think about marketing, then you're sabotaging yourself. Uh, I think that you want to give them something that's easy to sell. And these people, they get a lot of movies. They got to decide which ones they're going to release. That every weekend is full of films now. There's like no. There used to be down times in the year where there weren't many good films coming out, but now they'll release good films every weekend of the whole year. Potentially. And if you've got a horror film, you don't want it to open the same weekend as another horror film. So you've got to make sure your film is easier to market than those other ones. If these marketing people have to come up with some clever spin to make your film seem good, then it's more work on their part. So that they might pick a different film. And so I just thought Haunting in Connecticut, it was based on this documentary that was one of the most popular documentaries ever on Discovery Channel, called A Haunting in Connecticut. So the number of people that heard about that already was huge. And then when I met with Adam Simon and he showed me these pictures from the 1920s of ectoplasm coming out of people, that sort of weird meaty stuff, I was like, man, I can't believe that happened in the 20s and no one's ever put that in a movie before. And I just had this really clear image of what that would look like. And I thought, man, people are going to see that in the trailer and go, what the hell is that? I got to see that. How does a movie happen? What happens in the movie where it gets to that point? And and so I just thought that would be a really marketable thing. So I was really happy when they put it on the poster, because they did. That said, even though I was um, keen on it having good marketable elements, they didn't actually invite me into the marketing process very much. So, but I was really happy when they, the poster with the ectoplasm coming out of his mouth, just says, "Man, you got to see this film." That's weird. Just off the top of my head, I think you want to learn as much as you can about acting and performance and how to talk to actors is one thing. Two is uh, preparation. Be good at you know visualizing the scenes ahead of time, and not just in storyboard panels, but in like a floor plan. Like figure out how many setups you're going to have, because really, camera guys are much more interested in what the setups are going to be rather than what all this series of little squares are on the page. You know, that's something I really learned uh, on working in TV. Is it's all about you got time for this many setups, so you're going to try and figure out setups that where the camera will move around a bit, and you can get as much coverage as you can and as few setups as possible, and still make it look cool. And it's a puzzle, but it's really fun one, and it's one that you'll end up having more style and class if you plan ahead rather than just trying to figure it out on the day. And the good thing is, when you've planned ahead, then you can still change it on the day, but you have a better idea of what you're changing. Yeah, you know what the cost is when you change it to this, from this to this. Um, you've got the other version in your head, so you know what the trade-off is. I think, yeah, trying to find a story that's marketable, that's got a good hook to it, something that's high concept. I think, and I actually think that doesn't mean you don't not making a personal story. I feel like there's people tend to confuse form and content a little bit. Like, I think that if you figure out what you want to say, if there's something that you want to pay, what's so important in your film that what's this theme or whatever that you're so in, keen to say that you have to make it in a non-commercial film that's going to reach few people? Why not figure out what you want to say, and then say it in a way that will communicate with people on a wide audience. Like, for example, the Pixar films, I think, sometimes have some really deep themes in them, and quite like Toy Story 3, I thought had quite a profound message in it. It's like, can you love someone and let them go? And yet it was one of the most commercial films of the year, and I thought it was moving at the end. Whereas, say, there's like more artsy type films that supposedly, but that end up sometimes just being exercises in style. And I think if, if I think that sometimes the style overwhelms what the film's really trying to say. And I think if you really want to say something, why not figure out a way to say it within a commercial picture? Like, for example, like something I've probably been quoted in magazines and stuff before, and that is with a film like Witness. I think that the original writer wanted to make something about. He wanted to make a film about the Amish people, and their conflict with modern society, blah blah. And he realized probably not many people are going to want to see that film. But you make a cop drama where the guy's hiding out with the Amish, and he still got to say all the themes that he wanted to say, but in a way that more people, he could get Harrison Ford would be in the lead of it. He probably wouldn't have been the lead in that other film. And people that want to see a cop thriller will go and see it, and they get something extra. And the people that would have seen the Amish film get to see it, but they can actually take their friends and see it on Saturday night instead of half price Tuesday. And I think that if you're creative and you're you know a, a real creative spirit, you can figure out there's got to be ways to figure out what is it you really want to say in your film, and then put it in a form that will be more accessible to audiences. So you actually get to say what you want to say to more ultimately to a much wider audience.